Support for Donnybrook is provided in part by Design Air Heating and Cooling.
Seems fair to me. Well, if you don't know what fair is, you can't make it. Unacceptable by any reason.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.
It sure is. Thanks for joining us for another edition of Donnybrook. Wow, was there a lot to discuss this week, and we'll get to it. But first, let's meet our panelists, starting with the media veteran herself, Wendy Wiese, Bill McClellan from the Post-Dispatch, also from the Post and STLtoday.com, Joe Holleman, and Alvin Reid from the St. Louis American. Well, we're going to kick things off in just a moment, but first, a little thanks to Michelle Spencer, who is a great local artist from Jefferson County, I believe, and loaned us this piece of artwork for the mantle behind us on our rotating art series. Thank you very much, Michelle. And folks, you can find more of Michelle's work at michellespencerart.com. Hey, Joe, we're going to kick things off with you. I thought the story in the Wall Street Journal was really a disappointment and an eye-opener. It said that FEMA and its response to St. Louis's May 16th tornado has ground to a halt, that nothing is going on. And they say a lot of the experienced workers were replaced by political appointees. A lot of the experienced FEMA workers took the Doge buyout from Elon Musk. At the same time, they are no longer using computers. They're using paper and pencil. And it just seemed as if they're not making door-to-door visits anymore. Nothing is going on, and they say this has not quite happened before. Apparently, St. Louis and the flash flood victims in Texas are the first to be part of this revamped FEMA that's kind of like destroying the agency and sending any work on recovery to the states and the cities.
Right, and what they did was send a bunch of money. Our City Hall reporter, Austin Hughley, had reported that about a week or two ago. But they said no, as far as boots on the ground help, no. Here's a bunch of money, we'll send you consultants, but kind of you guys are responsible for cleaning it up. And it's something that had been sort of signaled before the tornado hit that this was what was going to happen, that states were going to have to become more responsible for the cleanups. What people have complained about, though, is that there doesn't seem to be any help whatsoever coming from FEMA. Not just a transitional change, but as you said, ground to a halt. And there were a couple other places that are experiencing the same problem. So now Josh Hawley is saying he wants answers from FEMA and wrote a letter, one of those scathing letters that politicians write to department heads, saying, I want this information by Monday, exactly what you're doing in St. Louis and why is it not going well. So we'll see if he does anything about it other than first get the information.
Well, if Josh Hawley wants answers, I know exactly where he can find them. And that's 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Call the president and say, Mr. President, enough is enough. I don't know why anybody's surprised. This administration is about culture wars and ICE and all this stuff. But the actual helping of the people that need help, that is so far down the line. I'm not surprised at all. And I think anybody in St. Louis, within a week after that tornado hit, had to know that this day was coming, that the government does not care what's going to happen to us in St. Louis. So whatever our plans are, we better get to it. If that 30-member committee is meeting, I wish they would let us know.
It's a blue city in a very red state.
But that's supposed to not matter, though.
I understand that. And if Texas, if they're dragging their heels in Texas as well, that's just kind of shocking.
Well, this is just part of the government that they're collapsing. They don't want FEMA anymore. They'll dish out a little money, but the fact that it's happening in Texas, which is a red state,
typically
with powerful politicians on Trump's side, there is an indication that that he's not just doing this stuff.
But
they want to stop all
I get
of
the
it.
impression that Joe or the Wall Street Journal informed Josh Hawley about this because Hawley is, as you report, the chair of the Senate Subcommittee on Disaster Management. And it's only this week that he's jumping to it, responding to your story, to the Wall Street Journal. I mean, why has he been quiet for the fact that FEMA has transferred 400 agents to ICE when those agents could be in St. Louis?
I think I can answer that. You know, Josh Hawley's trying to separate himself from the field for 2028. You can't be against MAGA or you won't get the nomination, but you want to separate yourself in some way. And he saw the Wall Street Journal, or Joe called him, and he just thought, this is an opportunity for me to be apart from the rest of the crowd, and he's taking it. Very smart guy.
Like so many of our politicians, I did not graduate from Harvard, but I can put together the importance when it comes to the American people when you have emergency management in the title of your agency or aviation. I want there to be an enormous amount of attention. I think everybody does when it comes to those two particular agencies. So it's really alarming to think that, FEMA's just kind of...
and at the same time, I'm not sure Wesley Bell's been on top of this, or Ann Wagner, or Eric Schmidt, or any of our representatives in Washington.
And I do think one thing that gets kind of lost, you remember back to Katrina?
Yeah.
It's not like FEMA was getting rave reviews at Katrina. And I think the thing that gets lost, and it gets more and more lost in sort of the partisan wars that we're in, is this government has had a history of being ineffective and inefficient for decades, centuries. So the idea, it's not like, FEMA was working like a Swiss watch up until St. Louis's tornado.
But there are
That's
differences.
never been the case.
There are differences. In other cities like New Orleans, yes, FEMA did send extra trailers for schools for the students when their schools were destroyed. They haven't done that in St. Louis.
But that
they
was
haven't
after,
helped the students at all.
That was after the catastrophic
it was a
huge,
never been seen before thing. I'm not excusing FEMA and Brownie and all that down there.
Great job, Brownie.
I just, the difference, Joe, is this is by choice. This is purely by choice. I understand bureaucracy and incompetency, but this is by choice, and that's what hurts.
Well, I think there's difference in choices, and the people who chose Donald Trump have different choices than the people who didn't. And I think that's what people are grappling with.
That's kind of what I was saying. My first statement is like, why is anybody surprised?
But they won't if a tornado decides to, or a flood decides to rip through their neighborhood.
The reason I'm surprised, Alvin, because I don't recall this during the first administration. During the first Trump administration, I don't recall FEMA being gutted as it is now.
Well, I mean, you make promises, you make every wild promise, and then you fulfill them, and then everybody's sitting around saying, like, I didn't know he was going to do that to me. I didn't know he was going to do that to me.
All right. Yeah. Hey, Wendy, I want to ask you about some good news in St. Louis. British Airways announced that it's going to fly direct 4 days a week, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Fridays, and Sundays between St. Louis and London. Do you think that the Londoners are going to be visiting us, maybe going to the World Cup or Route 66, or do you think it's mostly going to be St. Louisans getting on the plane, going to London, enjoying England, and then coming back?
I think it will probably be a little heavier with the, St. Louisans and elsewhere in the region traveling over to London. But I think that there is still, we forget, Chuck Berry, the Blues, the Tina Turner. We have quite a legacy to be proud of. And I think overseas, there's still a great deal of interest in it. What was so surprising to me, I think, and a lot of other people who read the article, and first of all, Rhonda Hamm-Nebrugge, this is a huge thing for her office out at Lambert. I know she's excited about that. But the fact that our GDP, in the city is like one of the highest, like 200 billion, in excess of 200 billion. Our local GDP and our per person GDP is, I never heard of anything
I thought that was all a misprint. I mean, I think that it's wonderful news that we're getting a direct flight to London. And, and maybe we will get some tourists here. Certainly, they'll all be going to Kansas City for the World Cup from there. But we got it because of our high GDP. I'm no economist, but this was startling.
I know, it really was.
We'll look forward to the breakdown of that. But on the exact same day that British Airways announced that they were going to have nonstop from St. Louis to London, and we knew this was coming, but it became official. the University of Kansas is going to play Arizona State in London next fall, and they officially announced the game on the same day that British Airways said there's a flight to St. Louis. And I'm just like,
I bet you already have your ticket.
Wait, okay, leave Tuesday, get a little touring in, game on Saturday, come home Sunday.
Yeah.
I already thinking about it up here.
Well,
I also just drove back from Seattle to St. Louis, and we could really market that gateway to the West, because just as interested as we were over the decades in Sherlock Holmes and Jack the Ripper, people in England were really into the Wild West, and they used to come over here, a lot of them, and do that Oregon Trail stuff and go see Mount Rushmore. And so I think we could really market ourselves to make this a benefit to St. Louis.
I've been out to Zion National Park several times, hiked throughout it. Always run into a bunch of Europeans who are coming over here to see our national parks. Grand Canyon, it's multilingual. I mean, when you listen to the conversations you're going around, I mean, I think the idea is, your hometown's never interesting to you, and you think that's not interesting, but there is scenery. I mean, like I told people, I had never been to the Badlands in the Dakotas. I drove through there. I was knocked out at how gorgeous it was. And I think those things we take for granted. I think if you're in another country, it sounds positively exotic.
Yeah, I do too, but whether or not you can still use this as the gateway, like the Yellowstone. Like, hey, if you want to visit Yellowstone, fly to St. Louis. I don't know.
I don't think so. I think you'd fly out west, wouldn't you, Joe?
I think
Well,
so.
I think you can, but
I didn't say we're getting every single European who wants to go there.
I'll tell you what we could do. There's a lot of European interest in some of our great historic figures, including Maya Angelou, Josephine Baker, Tina Turner, and I think, and Chuck Berry, of course, we could do a better job at, we haven't even marked Maya Angelou's birth or home where she lived, with a plaque, things like that. And at the same time, this week, Tina Turner, there was a statue put up of her, and I think in Mississippi. Why isn't there one of Tina Turner in St. Louis?
The tornado?
The tornado.
We're trying to put out a few other fires. But I didn't realize that Lufthansa has had such success. That they're expanding, and in a global marketplace, this helps. I really do believe that this is an exciting development for the future.
We need to also use this as, hey, let's clean it up, let's smarten it up, let's put an extra coat of paint on the airport, which y'all think is fine, but I think is not fine.
I agree.
At
the Southwest Terminal, you get your bags, and there's a big garden out there, but it has no flowers in it.
Right.
I think they should put flowers in there. And Joe, I think you're right. You go to Ted Drew's, you will meet people from Europe who are here to see Route 66.
Right.
And next year, I think, is the 100th anniversary.
Right. Having a big 100th anniversary. Darren LaHood, a congressman from Illinois, suburban Chicago area, Peoria. So that's not, Chicago considers it suburban Chicago, but Peoria and a bunch of other folks have jumped on this bill to make it a national trail. And the funny thing about it was real interesting. When I said I was out at Zion National Park, both times when I said to people, I said, how did you know about this over in, one was from Holland, they were Dutch, and the other one were German, and they're saying, we're over here for Route 66. The two different groups. I was like, pardon me?
Right.
I was like, you came over here for Route 66? Oh, yeah, that's fascinating, and those little motels on the way, and they were like gaga over the idea of Route 66.
Well,
and I think there's appeal to those kind of things. And especially now, I think it goes along the lines with when you mentioned people care about like coffee shops and things, not the big. I think Route 66 has that kind of old school, nostalgic, romantic kind of notion.
Maybe they could bring the TV show back.
That's something different.
Reruns.
But it's something different than let's go see this big monument. Let's go see this. Here's something that's a little, call it kitschy, call it campy. But I think it's the kind of thing people might be looking for.
Well, and don't forget that in 2008, and it received intergalactic coverage. Sir Paul McCartney was here for his 66th birthday. Stopped here and stopped in Springfield, Illinois.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
but look, I'm going to jump into the Love Fest for just a moment and bring up a point that I saw in this week's Business Journal. They take a look at the Hotel St. Louis at 705 Olive. It's a Louis Sullivan building. It's currently owned by Amy and Amrit Gill, and they say they have called the city hundreds of times trying to get the nearby properties cleaned up. Across the street, it looks terrible. Next door at the chemical building, Railway Exchange, it's decrepit, a lot of trash and litter, and people are starting to comment on it online. Maybe April 19th, the day that British Airways starts its first flight from St. Louis to London, we should mark that as the day, our target, to clean up this city.
I mean,
I love that.
We're all journalists. Deadline, for some reason, makes you get active, right?
Well, except I wouldn't. If I was running it, I wouldn't start even thinking about the cleanup until April 12th. I go. We still have a week, and we
Just
got
like
to
your
do
math
that.
final,
So
right?
I don't know about that.
I think that's a good idea. I mean, I think those are the things that shouldn't be. They don't take a lot of planning. They need trucks and elbow grease and pick up the garbage.
Yeah.
But then again, I think that's a solution to a whole lot of problems that cities face that seem to get ignored because they're not very romantic ideas.
Bill, I want to ask you about the governor who has applied for an exemption from certain rules regarding food stamps or SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. Currently, you can buy candy and sweets and salty snacks with your benefits. He wants to change the rules so that in Missouri, you'll only be able to buy healthy foods, with some exceptions, of course. You'll be able to get cornflakes, but also frosted cornflakes. But nonetheless, do you overall approve that plan?
No, and I respectfully disagree with the governor on this, and I say respectfully because famously he was raised by a single mother, and I think he cares deeply about these kids and feels like he's doing the right thing. But the reality of a lot of these mothers is they live in food deserts, they don't have transportation to get to supermarkets, and I think that you have to give them a little latitude on this. And I know healthy food is important. And like I say, I'm convinced that the governor feels like he's doing the right thing, but I think you have to give these mothers a little more latitude.
I think that the governor really could care less about these little kids and whatnot, because if he did, a lot of the policies he backs, he would not support. However, the idea that you can't buy candy bars and snacks with SNAP dollars, I agree with that. I always have. I think that money should be used for staple foods, and then what you do have left over with your own money, then you can buy snacks.
Well, I think that the law of unintended consequences comes to play, Alvin, that just like there's a black market for food stamps, I suppose that there is for the SNAP coupons, and if you can't get to the grocery store and you have $100 worth of SNAP coupons, you might be able to sell them for $50.
Well, it's on a card now. Now, back when you used to physically get the stamps, I know about this. Rich people you'd go to the grocery store and there'd be somebody out there,
Right.
I'll give you $80 worth of food stamps for $60, and you would, I'm sorry, but I don't care what you're going to buy with this cash, but I will take these food stamps in here with pride,
I think it's a good idea what Governor Kehoe is proposing. If we're going to talk about health, and since everybody's opposed to Donald Trump's appointment for our Department of Health and Human Services, and what about the health of Americans? I just don't see where candy and soda, if you want to buy that with your own money, fine. But like Alvin said, it's basically for things like meat and eggs and milk. And yes, frosted flakes. And if the milk's chocolate milk, I don't care. But the idea that you're going to spend this money on Snickers bars and Dr. Peppers, it's not a good idea. Period.
I just think it seems kind of punitive to people who already probably are they're not living their best life, and they're just trying very hard. So if there was a certain percentage dedicated to maybe fun food, I wouldn't have a problem with that.
I think you have to think that these people really want the best for their kids.
Sure
It's just
they do.
like schools. The reason charter schools do well even though they have poor outcomes is that desperate people are looking around and saying, I want something better for my child than the public school. And they might be wrong, but I think that the parents really want the best for their kids, but if they can't get to the grocery store,
Yeah.
Bill, I'm going to believe the opposite, that the people who want the best for their kids are trying to cut down the amount of soda and candy they're eating anyway. So,
And I think the salty snacks are designed by engineers at big companies to addict people. I think people are buying that stuff, the Cheetos, the Doritos, the Fritos, because they get addicted.
Don't get Jennifer Blome started on this topic, because she had read many books that point that out and explain it, chapter and verse, that these snacks, I think, like Cheetos, they are absolutely engineered to turn us all into addicts with orange fingers.
What did you make, Wendy, of the fight that apparently broke out after a town hall meeting in Bell Fountain Neighbors between the chairman of the St. Louis County Council, Shalonda Webb, and a state senator, Angela Mosley? It's gotten so bad, one of the individuals, I forget which, broke a finger, and now one is suing the other. It's happening a lot lately. There was a guy who was the chairman of the Democratic Central Committee in the county, Jonathan Besch, who's accused of beating up a state representative, Michael Burton, something like that. What is going on?
I think that these are very extreme times, and I think social media is the accelerant, if you will. I think people are used to being hyper aggressive these days on social media. We didn't used to be like this. There are people who will say, so what? They had a little fisticuffs. I think that when you have elected officials, and I don't care who they are, you deal with it like grown-ups. I mean, just send a juvenile email or something, but when hands are, when you lay hands on somebody, then you're not representing your office or your voters, your constituency very well.
And that's the key word there, representing. Now, who are you representing? You're representing a large African-American population in North County. We do not have time for foolishness like this. I mean, we're planning our defense strategy and I turn around and two people are arguing or fighting and getting in a fist fight about this, and we're in some type of battle, both of them are court-martialed. If not, even worse. Both of them should stand down. Can we please find somebody else to run who is responsible, who is honest, and who is not an embarrassment to the community? I mean, it's just sad.
I don't think it's an embarrassment. I think it just happens. Remember, you're the sports columnist for The American. Before one of the playoff games between the Hawks and the Celtics, didn't the owner of the Hawks, Ben Kerner, get in a fight with Red Auerbach at the middle of the court?
At a sporting event, I mean, fights break out on the court or on the field. That's a sporting event.
This is a meeting about the 75th anniversary of Bell Fountain Neighbors.
It's sad. That's sad.
Well, unfortunately, we've come to the point where you can't expect our elected officials to be paragons of virtue. I mean, that's not the sort of people we're electing.
There was a time when it was radio DJs or hosts who got in fights in arena parking lots and in studios and elsewhere, right?
Yeah.
The Kevin Slaytons, the J.C. Corcorans.
Right. I mean, it never came to blows. But we have been in newspapers and this was over philosophical issues, where it got a little bit heated and everybody's mad, and there's swear words flying and face to face. And within an hour, everybody's having a drink, okay? Because it was about the business. This is not about the business. This is about just some nonsense.
Well, speaking of politics, Joe, what do you think about Cori Bush? You're right that possibly she's going to challenge Wesley Bell next year in the primary for the 1st Congressional District.
Right. A number of sources have told myself and Austin Hughley, City Hall reporter for the Post, who have seen her what indicates making preparations, making videotapes around town, talking with people, attempting to hire staff, communications people. So it seems that she is poised, preparing to make another run at that 1st Congressional District seat that she lost to Wesley Bell. She has not yet announced, but it makes logical sense. She never said she was never not going to run. If you remember the day she lost, she was very vociferous, very strident how this wasn't the end and that she was going to possibly be back. And from what we have found out, talking to a number of people, she seems to be getting those ducks in an order.
Double-digit loss. Double-digit. Single-digit this time. Double-digit loss. I don't even think the factors that led to her defeat this time, I don't even think they'll come into play. Her own constituents, I do not see her being supported by them. 10% loss.
Well, I agree that she's going to lose. And I think she'll run. I think she'll lose. But I think her supporters are telling her, hey, you were proven right on Gaza. Gaza's a complete mess, and Wesley Bell's not saying anything. And I think she's being egged on by her supporters, but there just aren't enough of them.
But what if a third person gets in the primary?
Well,
that could change the dynamics.
It all depends on who the third person is.
That's right.
And that could create an opportunity for someone to sneak in.
Oh, you looking at me?
Or it could kill a challenger's opportunity to unseat Wesley Bell.
That's right.
So without knowing who that third person is, it's pure conjecture.
And also, when this midterm election comes around, Democrats will be very serious about winning every seat they can. Listen, they'll say, Wesley Bell, you're the guy. Gory Bush, go away.
We are out of our discussion time. Now to your letters. I love that most of your panel supports the idea of an Armory data center when most do not even live in the city. That from Chris Easley of St. Louis. Charlie stated that the St. Louis earnings tax is levied equally 1% on both the employee and the employer. This is a common misunderstanding. While the employee portion is 1%, the employer is liable for 0.5%. Thank you, Dave Swatek of St. Louis. Bradley Bowman of Jefferson County wrote, I don't understand the mentality of people who live in St. Louis. Everyone wants money and development to flow into St. Louis, but every time a company or a developer tries, the same people complain that it's not the right type. We also heard this from the 9 line.
I went to the Symphony's free concert on Art Hill on September 17th, and I think SLSO should adopt a new motto. SLSO, we draw more people than the Cardinals. Thank you.
Thank you, Rick Dorsey. You can write us care of 9PBS 63108. Don't forget emails, Donnybrook@9pbs.org. Social media, use hashtag DonnybrookSTL. Call the 9 line like Mr. Dorsey did at 314-512-9094. And wherever you are, listen to us on your favorite podcast source. It's called Last Call on the 9PBS YouTube channel. This week we'll talk about crime at Mizzou. Is it out of control? That's it for this week's program. We hope you join us next week at this time.
Donnybrook is made possible by the support of the Betsy and Thomas Patterson Foundation and the members of 9PBS.